Lamination, the official armor of the terminally serious. The sheet of plastic was still dewy from the morning mist, clinging to my windshield wiper like a sad, rectangular squid. I peeled it off. The paper inside was crisp, protected from the elements, its message of bureaucratic doom preserved for all eternity. Homeowners Association, violation. Notice, Maple Creek Estates, violation, Section 9.4b, unapproved waste receptacle placement. Details, commercial construction dumpster located 0.75 inches over the approved 24-inch setback from the curb. Remedy, immediate relocation of the offending receptacle, issued by Brenda Baxter, President, MCE HOA, 0.75 inches. Not 3/4 of an inch. 0.75. The precision was both absurd and terrifying. "Problem, boss?" a voice called out from my garage. I turned, the laminated death warrant still in my hand. Dave stood there, wiping drywall dust on his already dusty jeans, a grin splitting his face. Behind him, his apprentice Gary, a man of few words and many meaningful grunts, leaned against a stack of lumber, looking like he was single-handedly holding the garage wall up through sheer force of will. "We've been cited," I announced, holding up the notice. "Our dumpster is a fugitive from justice. Apparently it made a break for it last night and nearly reached the lawless wilds of the street." Dave strode over and took the sheet from me, his eyes scanning the text. He let out a low whistle. 0.75 inches. She must have come out here with a laser transit and a government-calibrated ruler. "Gary, you hear this? We're outlaws." Gary grunted, which I took to mean he was suitably impressed by our newfound criminal status. This was day 3 of the Great Garage Transformation. For 20 years, I'd worked as a high-stress electrical engineer for a firm that designed power grids for things that absolutely, positively could not fail. Hospitals, emergency data centers, military command posts. I spent my life arguing with colonels about redundant power feeds and explaining to surgeons why they couldn't plug a coffee maker into a circuit meant for a heart-lung machine. It was a world of high stakes, zero tolerance for error, and endless meetings with men in suits who thought a kilowatt was a type of exotic fruit. 6 months ago, I'd cashed out. I was 45, I had enough to live comfortably, and my soul was weary. I bought this house in the aggressively beige suburb of Maple Creek Estates for one reason. It had a 3-car garage that was begging to be turned into a personal power station with some tools in it. My dream was simple. I wanted a place where the only person I had to argue with was a stubborn bolt, and the only board of directors was a piece of 2x4 that wasn't sitting flush. "Dave," I'd said on day 1, unrolling a set of blueprints that looked like they belonged to a nuclear submarine, "I don't think you understand the vision here." He'd squinted at the schematics. "Alex, this calls for 6 dedicated 240-volt circuits. What in God's name are you planning on doing in here? Opening a portal to another dimension?" "Close," I said. "The lathe needs its own 50-amp circuit. Clean power, no fluctuations. The milling machine needs a clean 30-amp. The TIG welder, well, let's just say that when I fire it up, I don't want the neighbor's Christmas lights to flicker. We're not building a workshop. We're building an electrical Taj Mahal. And I want more copper in these walls than in a national mint." He'd just shaken his head and started quoting me prices, but the gleam in his eye told me he was enjoying the absurdity of it. Dave was a craftsman, and he respected glorious overkill. Now, holding this notice, I felt the first cold prickle of the world I'd tried to leave behind. The world of petty tyrants and rules for the sake of rules. Brenda Baxter. I'd seen her, of course, a woman in her late 50s who seemed to power walk around the neighborhood with a singular purpose, to find joy and extinguish it. "So what's the play?" Dave asked, handing the notice back. "Do we nudge the dumpster back a smidge?" I looked at the massive steel box, full of shattered drywall and old wiring. It probably weighed 4 tons. Moving it less than an inch would require a surgeon's touch and a crane. "Nah," I said, crumpling the laminated sheet in my fist. The plastic fought back, refusing to be destroyed. A fitting metaphor. I jammed it into my pocket. "It's from the HOA. It's a suggestion, not a subpoena. Let's get back to work. We have conduits to run." Dave shrugged. "Your funeral, boss?" Gary grunted in agreement. I walked back into my dusty sanctuary, the smell of sawdust and ozone a welcome balm. It was just a note. A passive-aggressive welcome to the neighborhood from a woman with too much time on her hands. What's the worst that could happen? It was a question born of blissful, beautiful ignorance. I had no idea that I wasn't just building a workshop. I was building a fortress. And the first siege was about to begin. The next morning, I was on my back deck, savoring a cup of coffee and the rare suburban silence. My property was on the edge of the development, which was one of its few selling points. My backyard ended at a tall, well-maintained chain-link fence. On the other side wasn't another row of identical beige houses, but the solid, unassuming brick expanse of the Oak Valley Regional Blood Center. It was a quiet neighbor. No loud parties, no barking dogs, just the gentle hum of industrial-grade air conditioning. It was that hum that drew my attention. Standing by the fence, on my side, was Brenda Baxter. She wasn't looking at my house, but through the fence at the blood bank. She was wearing what I was beginning to recognize as her official uniform: khaki capris, a pink polo shirt, and a visor that seemed permanently attached to her head. In her hands, she held a thick, 3-ring binder. Her book of bylaws. She was glaring at a brand-new piece of equipment on the blood bank's property, a large metal box painted a dull industrial green. It was an HVAC unit of some kind, probably a chiller or compressor, judging by the thick pipes running from it. It looked clean, professional, and entirely necessary for a building that stored medical supplies. To Brenda, however, it was clearly a declaration of war. I watched, fascinated, as she paced along the fence line, occasionally stopping to consult her binder, her lips moving as she read some sacred text. Then, with a newfound resolve, she marched to the blood bank's employee entrance and began hammering on the door. A few moments later, a woman in blue scrubs, her hair pulled back in a neat bun, opened the door. Her face was a mixture of confusion and concern. I was too far away to hear the words, but the body language was a universal language. Brenda was lecturing, her finger jabbing first at the green box, then at her open binder. The woman in scrubs, whom I would soon know as Dr. Anya Evans, kept shaking her head, her hands spread in a gesture of utter bafflement. The whole tableau was so bizarre I almost dismissed it. But later that afternoon, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find the same woman in scrubs. Up close, I could see the stress etched around her eyes. She was clutching a piece of paper, unlaminated this time, a sign of amateur-level aggression, and looked to be on the verge of tears. "Hi," she said, her voice strained. "I'm so sorry to bother you. I'm Anya Evans, the director at the blood center next door. I saw your contractor's truck, and I'm not sure who else to ask. I think I'm in a dispute with your neighborhood." I leaned against the doorframe. "Let me guess. Khaki capris, pink polo, wields a binder like a weapon?" A small, relieved smile touched her lips. "You know her?" "We're acquainted," I said. "My dumpster and I are currently on her most wanted list. I'm Alex, please come in." I led her into the kitchen and poured her a glass of water. She set the paper down on the counter. It was another violation notice, nearly identical to mine, but the stakes were considerably higher. She's claiming our new cryocompressor is an unapproved outbuilding, Dr. Evans said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. I tried to explain what it does, that it's a vital piece of medical equipment. It keeps our rare blood types and plasma cryogenically frozen at -80 degrees Celsius. The old one was failing. This new one is state-of-the-art. And what did she say? I asked, already knowing the answer. She said it was, and I quote, aesthetically disharmonious with the sylvan character of the community. Then she handed me this. She tapped the paper. Sylvan character? We're next to a 4-lane highway. I picked up the notice. Sure enough, it cited some obscure bylaw about structures being visible from a member's property. My engineering brain, the one I'd been trying to shut off for 6 months, flickered to life against my will. New compressor, I said, thinking aloud. That's a heavy-duty piece of machinery. What's the power draw on it? Dr. Evans looked surprised by the question. It's significant. We had to have the utility company install a new dedicated commercial feed for it. There's a new transformer box back there, too. She's furious about that. Calls it an unsightly metal monstrosity. And there it was. The real issue. It wasn't just about what she could see. It was about the infrastructure needed to support it. She wasn't just mad about a box. She was mad about the power that fed the box. My internal alarm bells, honed by years of dealing with infrastructure-averse NIMBYs, began to ring. What's the backup power situation? I asked. We have a diesel generator, of course, she said. It can run the essentials, but it takes about 90 seconds to kick on after a failure. The new compressor has its own internal battery backup, but it's only designed to last for about 5 minutes, just long enough to bridge the gap until the main generator starts. 5 minutes. A 5-minute window before tens of thousands of dollars and countless lives' worth of rare blood products begin to spoil. The absurdity of the situation evaporated, replaced by a cold dread. This wasn't funny anymore. Brenda Baxter wasn't just a neighborhood nuisance. She was a threat vector. Dr. Evans looked at me, her professional composure cracking. I don't know what to do. She gave me a 2-week warning to have it removed. We can't remove it. It's impossible. But she seems utterly convinced she has the authority to do something. I looked from Dr. Evans's worried face to the violation notice on my counter. My quiet retirement project had just been invaded. I'd spent my entire career protecting critical systems from failure, from acts of God, from human error. I had never, in all my years, planned for an adversary like this. An adversary armed with lamination and a bottomless well of self-righteous conviction. I let out a long sigh, the sigh of a man whose vacation has just been canceled. Dr. Evans, I said, pushing the notice back towards her. Could I borrow your copy of the HOA covenant? The big, scary binder she's always carrying around? She blinked. Yes, she left one with our facilities manager years ago. It's gathering dust in a filing cabinet. I'd like to read it, I said. A grim smile spread across my face. My workshop could wait. The engineer was back on the clock. All right, Brenda, let's dance. The next afternoon, I found Brenda on patrol. She was 2 streets over, standing ramrod straight in front of the Miller household, her eyes narrowed in concentration. She held a tape measure in one hand, extending it toward a small ceramic garden gnome that was standing sentinel next to a rose bush. "Excuse me, Brenda," I called out. She jumped, startled, and quickly retracted the tape measure as if caught doing something illicit. "Mr. Henderson, I was just ensuring the Miller's decorative statuary complies with the 18-inch height limit stipulated in Section 14, Paragraph 2A. "Right," I said, holding up my own copy of the HOA covenant, which I'd spent the previous night dissecting with a highlighter and a bottle of bourbon. I wanted to talk to you about the notice you gave the Oak Valley Blood Center." A hard, defensive look came over her face. "It's a straightforward violation. The matter is closed until the compliance deadline." "Actually, I don't think it is," I said, trying to keep my tone as neutral as possible. I flipped open the binder to a page marked with a yellow sticky note. According to the official plot map in Appendix C, the blood center's property line is clearly defined. It's zoned for commercial and medical use, and most importantly, it's not part of the Maple Creek Estates HOA. It's an adjacent property, not a member property, which means legally your bylaws have about as much authority over there as they do on the moon. I thought it was a pretty solid, logical argument. I had used facts and evidence. I had, in short, made a terrible tactical error. Brenda didn't even flinch. She responded by flipping her own binder open, her fingers finding the page she wanted with the unnerving speed of a seasoned zealot. "A common misconception," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You're referring to direct governance. I am referring to Bylaw 12.2a, the Community Character Clause. It states, and I quote, "Any structure, permanent or temporary, constructed on an adjacent property but visible from a member's property, which detracts from the homogeneous visual tapestry of the community, is subject to review and remedy by the Architectural Review Committee." I stared at her. "The homogeneous visual tapestry? Brenda, your house is beige, my house is beige, and every other house on this block is a slightly different shade of beige. It's not a tapestry, it's a paint sample card. And you can't possibly think that clause is legally enforceable. It's vague to the point of being meaningless." "It's vague to allow for flexibility in enforcement," she shot back, her eyes gleaming with righteousness. "That thing," she jerked her head in the general direction of the blood bank, "is a blight. It hums. It's an industrial eyesore. I don't care if it's curing cancer in there, it's painted the wrong shade of green. Our approved palette for outbuildings is taupe, sand, or ecru." I felt a vein begin to throb in my temple. We were arguing about the color of a life-saving medical device. The sheer, unadulterated absurdity of it was staggering. It was like trying to debate quantum physics with a pigeon. "Brenda," I said, taking a slow, calming breath. "That box keeps blood and plasma frozen, the things that save people's lives in car accidents and during surgery. It's not a garden shed. There is a higher purpose at play here than your approved color palette. The bylaws are the higher purpose of this community," she said, her voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. "They are what protect our property values. They are what separate us from chaos." She looked me up and down. "You're new here, Mr. Henderson. You don't appreciate the order we've cultivated, but you will learn." She reached into a pouch on her belt and produced another envelope. She handed it to me. "This is a copy of the official 2-week compliance warning I have filed with the Blood Center. I suggest you advise your new friends to take it seriously. The committee has a number of remedies at its disposal for persistent non-compliance." With that, she snapped her binder shut, gave the offending garden gnome one last withering glare, and power walked away, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with the letter in my hand, and the faint, unsettling feeling that I had just lost a battle I didn't even know how to fight. The clock was officially ticking. So let me get this straight. Dave was sitting on an overturned bucket in the middle of my garage, a half-eaten sandwich in his hand. Gary was perched on a sawhorse, methodically peeling an orange, his brow furrowed in concentration. I had just finished recounting my conversation with the High Priestess of Taupe. Dave took a large bite of his sandwich and chewed thoughtfully for a moment. "The Queen of Maple Creek," he said, swallowing, "is going to shut down the vampire juice factory because she doesn't like the color of their new air conditioner." "That's the gist of it," I said, pacing back and forth. She's hiding behind something called the homogeneous visual tapestry. Dave snorted. A tapestry? This place looks like it was decorated by a guy whose favorite flavor is vanilla. Gary, you hearing this? What do you think? Gary paused his orange peeling, held up a perfect, spiraled peel, and gave a short, sharp grunt. Gary thinks she's nuts, Dave translated. And Gary's a man of sound judgment. So what's her endgame? Is she going to stand outside their door and yell at them until they paint it? I don't think so, I said grimly. She mentioned remedies. And she wasn't talking about filing a lawsuit. There was a look in her eye. She genuinely believes she has the authority to fix the problem herself. Fix it how? Dave asked, his good humor fading slightly. It's a giant metal box bolted to a concrete slab and wired into the commercial power grid. I stopped pacing. That's what's bothering me. The power. She kept mentioning the unsightly new transformer. That's what this is really about. The box is just the excuse. I ran a hand through my hair. She's not just offended by the view, she's offended by the infrastructure. Dave unwrapped the other half of his sandwich. You know, he said casually, it's funny you mention that. When we were getting the permits for all your crazy wiring in here, I had to look at the utility plot maps for the street. All the main utility panels for this block. Power, cable, phone. They're all clustered together in that little utility easement behind the houses on her side of the street, right behind her prize-winning petunias. He took another bite. Real convenient for her if she ever wanted to, I don't know. Start poking around? I froze. A little nugget of tactical data filed away for a rainy day. Behind her house, you said? Yep, tucked behind a row of hedges. Bet half the people here don't even know it exists. Gary finished his orange, neatly stacked the peels, and looked at me. He raised an eyebrow. He didn't need to say a word. The question was obvious. What are you going to do about it? I didn't have an answer yet, but Dave's offhand comment had planted a seed, a dangerous, wonderful, electrically charged seed. Brenda was focused on the symptom, the big green box, but her real target, the only thing she could possibly affect, was the source, the power. And in that arena, she was playing in my backyard. The next week was a masterclass in the impotence of authority. Dr. Evans and I mounted a campaign of reason, logic, and decency. It was about as effective as trying to stop a tidal wave with a polite letter. Our first call was to the power company. I sat in Dr. Evans's small, cluttered office at the blood bank, the phone on speaker. Oak Valley Power, how can I help you? A bored voice chirped on the other end. Dr. Evans patiently explained the situation. The critical nature of her facility, the legally baseless threats from an adjacent HOA, the concern that this woman might try to interfere with their power supply. There was a long pause, filled with the sound of typing. Okay, ma'am, the voice said finally. I see your account. You're on a commercial tariff, bill is paid, no reported outages. The transformer and feed are on your private property. As long as the bill is paid, we don't get involved in aesthetic disputes with third parties. It sounds like a civil matter. A civil matter. The three most infuriating words in the English language. Next, we tried the city planning department. This time we got a man named George who sounded genuinely sympathetic, but ultimately useless. Sir, I explained, trying to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. This woman is threatening to take action against a vital piece of medical infrastructure based on her personal interpretation of an HOA bylaw that doesn't even apply to the property in question. I understand your frustration, I really do, George said, and I think he actually meant it. But the blood bank's permits for the new unit are all in order. They were approved 6 weeks ago. An HOA covenant is a private agreement. It's a civil matter. We can't intervene unless she, actually breaks a law. And what would that look like? I asked. Vandalism, destruction of property, trespassing, that sort of thing. Then it becomes a police matter. A police matter, which brought us to the inevitable climax of our bureaucratic adventure. 2 days later, Brenda made good on George's prediction. I was in my garage with Dave and Gary, calibrating the alignment on a new table saw, when I saw the flashing lights through the open door. 2 police cruisers were parked at the curb, right in front of the blood bank's entrance. Brenda was there, of course, in full oratorical flight. She was talking to 2 officers, a younger one who looked bewildered, and an older, more weathered one who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. I wiped my hands on a rag and walked over, arriving just in time to hear Brenda's accusation. "Dipe, and so they are clearly conducting illegal commercial operations in a residential adjacent zone without the consent of the community board." The older officer, whose name tag read Miller, let out a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 suburban squabbles. "Ma'am," he said, his voice gravelly with exhaustion, "this is a blood bank. It's been here for 30 years. We're not shutting it down because you don't like their air conditioner." "It is an unapproved outbuilding," she insisted, thumping her binder. I stepped forward. "Officers, Alex Henderson, I live next door. I can probably provide some context." Officer Miller turned his weary eyes on me. "Please." I quickly and calmly explained the situation. The non-existent jurisdiction of the HOA, the critical nature of the equipment, and the escalating baseless threats. The younger officer, Davis, took notes, his pen scratching furiously. Miller listened patiently, then turned back to Brenda. His expression had hardened. "Ma'am, I'm only going to say this one more time. This is a civil matter. However," he took a step closer to her, lowering his voice, "if you were to trespass on their property or tamper with their equipment, that would cease to be a civil matter and would become a criminal one. A very serious criminal one. Do you understand me?" Brenda drew herself up to her full height. "I understand that you are failing to enforce the rules that maintain the civility of this community, officer." Miller just stared at her for a long moment, his jaw tight. "Have a nice day, ma'am." He turned to his partner. "Davis, let's go. We're done here." They got in their cars and drove away. Dr. Evans, who had been watching from the doorway, looked utterly defeated. Brenda, on the other hand, stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, a smirk of triumph on her face. In her mind, she hadn't been warned. She had won. The police had come, and they had done nothing. She had faced down the authorities, and they had blinked. That night, a new notice appeared, taped to the front door of the blood bank. It was printed in a large, angry font. "Final notice of non-compliance. Failure to remove the offending structure by Friday at 12 p.m., noon, will result in direct remedial action as per the MCE HOA covenant. Power will be disconnected by authorized personnel to ensure the safety of the removal process." I stood there with Dr. Evans, reading it under the dim glow of the porch light. The implication was chillingly clear. Brenda now considered herself authorized personnel. The gloves weren't just off. They'd been incinerated. Friday was in 3 days. Logic had failed, reason had failed, the authorities had failed. It was time for physics. I retreated to my new workshop, which was still a mess of tools and wires, but was starting to feel like a proper command center. I told Dave and Gary to take the next couple of days off. I had a different kind of project to work on, one that required schematics, not saws. For the next 48 hours, I lived on coffee and grim satisfaction. I dove into the digital archives of the municipal grid, pulling up plot maps and power distribution plans for our entire sector. I cross-referenced them with blueprints from my old firm, which, in a stroke of cosmic luck, had handled a major infrastructure upgrade for the city a decade ago, including the area around the hospital. My suspicion had been a long shot, a gut feeling based on years of designing resilient systems, but as the schematics materialized on my widescreen monitor, The gut feeling solidified into hard data. I let out a low, triumphant laugh that echoed in the empty garage. The city's power grid, I explained to myself in a low mutter, was like a public road system, a network of streets and avenues carrying power to every house and business. It's reliable, mostly, but susceptible to traffic jams, accidents, and the occasional idiot cutting down a tree onto the power lines. But underneath that public system, known only to a select few, was a private, armored superhighway. A hardened, redundant, high-capacity network designed for continuity of operations, the emergency medical grid. It fed the Oak Valley General Hospital a mile away, the 911 Dispatch Center, and the main emergency services hub. It was designed to withstand earthquakes, blackouts, and just about anything short of a direct asteroid impact. And there it was, on a 20-year-old blueprint, a tiny dotted line branching off that superhighway. An on-ramp. It led directly to a utility panel on the side of the Oak Valley Regional Blood Center. It was a manual transfer switch, a feature installed during its initial construction as a condition of its critical service designation. It was a relic of a time when engineers planned for the worst. A feature likely forgotten by everyone at the city, everyone at the blood bank, and everyone in the world. Except the guy who now happened to live next door, and whose old firm had designed the damn thing. I knew the make and model of the transfer switch. I knew its amperage rating. I knew the specific type of municipal utility key required to open its access panel, and I knew that when thrown, it would sever the blood bank from the neighborhood's fragile beige, picket fence grid and connect it directly to the city's industrial-strength lifeline. Armed with this knowledge, I went to see Dr. Evans on Thursday evening. I found her in her office, looking pale and exhausted. "I have good news and bad news," I said, closing the door behind me. "I think I've had enough bad news for 1 week," she sighed. "The bad news is, I think Brenda is going to do it," I said bluntly. "I think tomorrow at noon, she's going to walk over to that utility cluster and cut your power." Dr. Evans's face went white. "She can't, can she?" "Physically, yes. The master breaker for your commercial feed is in a standard utility box. A $10 pair of bolt cutters from the hardware store could get through the lock. And once she's in, it's just a lever." I let that sink in for a moment. "I've also been looking at the specs for your backup generator," I continued, telling a small, strategic lie. "Given the massive power draw of that new compressor, I'm not convinced your generator can handle the startup load. There's a decent chance it'll fail to kick in properly." She looked like she was about to faint. "Alex, what are we going to do?" "That's the good news," I said, my voice calm and confident. "We're going to let her, and we're going to have a plan B. It's a bit of a break glass in case of emergency option, but I think we're officially there." I leaned forward. "I need you to do 2 things for me. First, tomorrow morning, I need you to perform a full startup test on your main backup generator. And I need you to make sure it fails that test. Disconnect a fuel line, trip a safety sensor, I don't care how. Just make sure that when the power goes out, that generator does not start. We need there to be no ambiguity about the danger you're in." She stared at me, her mind clearly racing to catch up. "Okay." "Second," I said, "and this is the most important part. When the power goes out tomorrow, I need you to trust me. Have your phone in your hand, and when I save the day, be ready to make a call. But until then, just play along." She searched my face, looking for any sign of doubt. She found none. "Okay, Alex," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Okay." I gave her a nod and walked out, leaving her in her office to prepare for the show. My own preparations were already complete. In the top drawer of my toolbox, nestled amongst my precision screwdrivers, was a specialized heavy-duty utility key, a souvenir from my old job that my boss had told me to keep. "You never know when you might need to open something you're not supposed to," he'd said with a wink. Tomorrow I was going to open something I absolutely was supposed to. Friday, 11:55 a.m. The air in my garage was thick with tension. I was crouched behind my new workbench, peering through a pair of high-powered binoculars aimed at Brenda Baxter's house. Dave and Gary had insisted on coming back, not to work, but to watch. They were my mission control, my co-conspirators. Dave was providing a running commentary, while Gary was stress-eating a bag of potato chips with a slow, rhythmic crunch that was starting to get on my nerves. "Okay, she's at the front door," Dave whispered, as if Brenda could hear us from 100 yards away. "She's adjusting her visor. Looks like she's doing some pre-battle stretches. A little arm windmill action." "Is she carrying the binder?" I asked, my eye glued to the eyepiece. "Negative on the binder, but oh boy, stand by." There was a pause. "She's got 'em, Alex. She's got the bolt cutters, bright yellow handles. She's holding them like they're the keys to the kingdom." Gary let out a low grunt, and the crunching of chips intensified. At exactly 11:59 a.m., Brenda began her march. She didn't walk down the sidewalk. She cut across her own perfectly manicured lawn, a woman on a holy mission. She disappeared behind the row of hedges that Dave had told me about, into the utility easement. My heart began to pound, a steady drumbeat of anticipation. I could picture it perfectly. The row of gray metal boxes. Her finding the one labeled Oak Valley Blood Center, Commercial Feed. The cheap municipal lock standing between her and her glorious purpose. 12 p.m. The rhythmic hum of the power tools and fans in my garage abruptly died. The overhead LED lights, my pride and joy, flickered and went dark, plunging us into a dusty twilight. A sudden, profound silence fell, broken only by Gary's startled crunch of a potato chip. In the distance, a faint, high-pitched shriek began. An alarm. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Dr. Evans. I hit answer and put it on speaker. "Alex, the power's out. It's all out." Her voice was a panicked squeak. "The generator, it failed the test, just like you said. It's not starting. The coolers are on battery. The main display says we're already losing temperature. We have minutes. The official rating is 5 minutes before the plasma goes out of spec." This was it. The moment of truth. "Dave," I barked, already moving. "Call 911. Tell them an individual is actively and deliberately cutting power to a critical medical facility at 12 Maple Creek Lane. Use the exact words reckless endangerment, an imminent threat to life. Go." I didn't wait for his confirmation. I was out the side door of the garage and sprinting. I vaulted my back fence with a grunt, landing on the soft grass of the buffer zone. I knew this area now like the back of my hand, every dip and rise, every sprinkler head. My lungs burned. The metallic taste of adrenaline flooded my mouth. I rounded the corner of the blood bank's brick wall and saw it. The secondary utility panel. The on-ramp to the superhighway. It was a heavy, windowless steel box, bigger than the others, with a single, thick lever encased behind a mesh screen. It had a heavy-duty municipal lock on its access door, and standing there, turning away from her handiwork at the other panel, was Brenda. Her face was a mask of smug satisfaction. The yellow bolt cutters dangled from her hand. She saw me, and her expression soured. "This area is for authorized personnel only," she shrieked, her voice cracking with indignation. I didn't slow down. I was pulling the heavy, star-shaped utility key from my pocket. "Brenda," I said, my voice coming in ragged breaths, "in the last 90 seconds you have committed about 7 different felonies. I, on the other hand," I reached the panel and jammed the key into the lock, "am authorized personnel." The lock turned with a satisfying, heavy click. I swung the panel door open. Inside, it was exactly as the blueprints had shown. A beautiful, terrifying cathedral of copper bus bars and thick, insulated cables. And in the center, the massive 3-position transfer switch. It was currently in the off position. Brenda stared, her jaw slack, as if she couldn't comprehend what was happening. I grabbed the thick, insulated handle. It was cool and solid in my sweaty palm. "You cut the power to the neighborhood grid," I said, gritting my teeth as I put my shoulder into it. "A rookie mistake." I threw all my weight into the lever, pushing it upwards. "You forgot about the hospital grid." There was a deafening thunk-ker-chunk that seemed to shake the very ground beneath my feet. For one single, heart-stopping second, there was silence. Then, a deep, powerful filled the air. The sound of unrestrained, high-voltage electricity surging to life. The high-pitched alarms from inside the blood bank instantly cut off. The building's external lights and every light inside flashed on, brighter and steadier than before. I leaned against the panel, breathing heavily, my heart hammering against my ribs. Total time from power out to power restored. 2 minutes and 41 seconds. Brenda stared at the humming panel, then at me, then back at the bolt cutters in her hand, as if she'd never seen them before. Her face was a perfect portrait of shattered conviction. And in the distance, the sound of approaching sirens grew louder and louder. I looked at her, gave her a tired, sarcastic little wave, and waited for the cavalry to arrive. The cavalry arrived in force. 2 cruisers screamed to a halt on the street, and this time Officer Miller and Officer Davis weren't in a mood for a civil discussion. They came out of their cars fast, their faces grim. Dave had clearly done his job. Dr. Evans came running out of the blood bank's front door, her face a mixture of relief and fury. "She did it!" she yelled, pointing a trembling finger at Brenda. "That woman, she cut our power, all of it!" Miller's eyes locked onto Brenda. They took in the whole scene. Me, panting, with my hand on an open, humming high-voltage panel. Brenda, standing frozen with a pair of industrial bolt cutters. The mangled municipal lock lying on the grass next to the other utility box. "Ma'am," Miller said, his voice dangerously calm. "Put the bolt cutters down, slowly." Brenda seemed to snap out of her trance. The cutters clattered to the ground. It was a violation," she stammered. "The bylaws. Section 12. It was an unapproved—" "I'm going to stop you right there," Miller said, walking toward her while Davis went to check on Dr. Evans. He knelt and looked at the broken lock, then at the open panel. He looked back up at me. "You want to tell me what happened here, sir?" I gave him the short, clinical version. "She cut the master feed from the public grid," I said, pointing to the vandalized box. "This is the emergency transfer switch. It connects the facility to the priority medical grid. I'm a retired electrical engineer. I knew it was here. I restored power." Miller nodded slowly, absorbing the information. He understood perfectly. This wasn't a squabble about offense. He was standing at the scene of a deliberate attack on a medical facility. He turned his gaze back to Brenda, and all the weariness was gone from his eyes, replaced by a cold, hard anger. "Brenda Baxter," he said, his voice flat and official, "you are under arrest for reckless endangerment, felony destruction of property, and interfering with a critical public service." The color drained from Brenda's face. "Arrest? You can't arrest me. I am the president of the Homeowners Association. I was upholding the community standard. It's in the bylaws." Officer Davis, having finished talking to Dr. Evans, now came to Miller's side, a pair of handcuffs in his hand. "Ma'am, I think the bylaws are going to be the least of your worries," he said, not unkindly. The final image was something I will treasure for the rest of my days. As Officer Davis clicked the cuffs shut behind her back, Brenda, in a final, desperate act of defiance, tried to explain the nuances of the homogeneous visual tapestry to him. He just nodded, with the infinite patience of a man who has heard it all and gently guided her toward the back of his cruiser. Her reign of beige-colored terror was officially over. 1 week later, my workshop was complete. It was my sanctuary, my heaven. The air smelled of fresh-cut pine and the faint, clean scent of ozone from the new air filtration system. My tools were arrayed on the walls in neat, orderly rows. The lighting was perfect. The power was, to put it mildly, abundant. Dave and Gary were there, helping me move the last heavy piece of equipment, a beautiful, vintage metal lathe, into place. They had a housewarming gift for me. "We thought this would really tie the room together," Dave said with a grin. He handed me a simple wooden plaque. Mounted in the center, under a small piece of plexiglass, was the mangled, twisted lock that Brenda had cut off the power panel. Beneath it, a small brass plate was engraved with a single sentence: "Some problems require a finer touch." I laughed and hung it on the wall, right next to the main circuit breaker panel. It was perfect. As they were packing up to leave, Dr. Evans stopped by. She was smiling, looking 10 years younger. She carried a large box of donuts and a card signed by the entire blood bank staff. "Just wanted to say thank you one last time," she said, "and to give you an update." We stood by my workbench as she talked. The district attorney was, in her words, throwing the book at Brenda. The list of charges was impressive. The power company was suing her for the cost of the repairs, and the National Blood Services Organization had gotten involved, with their team of very expensive, very aggressive lawyers. Brenda's homogeneous visual tapestry was about to be cross-stitched with lawsuits and legal fees. "And the best part," Dr. Evans said, a twinkle in her eye, "is that the city, after reviewing the incident, has decided that leaving a critical facility on the public grid is an unacceptable risk. They've made our connection to the emergency medical grid permanent. We're safer and more secure than ever before. All thanks to you." After she left, I was alone in my workshop. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows. I walked over to my new power distribution panel, a magnificent steel box with rows of neatly labeled switches. Just for the hell of it, I flipped them all on. The overhead lights blazed to life. The dust collection system roared. The air compressor kicked in with a hiss. The lathe began to hum. My digital power meter barely flickered. The entire system drew less than 20% of its capacity. It was glorious. I grabbed a cold beer from the mini-fridge I'd installed, on its own dedicated, surge-protected circuit, of course, and walked over to the plaque on the wall. I looked at the mangled lock, a monument to petty tyranny vanquished by superior engineering. I took a long swallow of beer and smiled. Some people get their kicks from power trips and binders full of rules, from measuring the height of garden gnomes and legislating the color of paint. Me? I'll take a well-thrown 800-amp manual transfer switch any day of the week. It's just so much more satisfying.